Hey guys, in this Red Gaming Tech video I'm going to be talking about survival horror games and the horror games in general. Now, before we get started, I'm going to give a quick, brief history of the genre, although I probably guess it's not necessary, but I'll just do so anyhow. As I'm sure many of you are aware, the most kind of influential and definitely the most well-known of the horror games is Resident Evil. Resident Evil, of course, started life out on the PlayStation 1, and it kind of spurred many remakes, sequels, and whatever else, and even novels and movies and all that good stuff. I'll talk more about Resident Evil later on, however, I'm just going to quite quickly give credit where credit is due, and mention that the actual real inventor of survival horror was, of course, Alone in the Dark. And Alone in the Dark put into a mansion and all that good stuff, and Capcom for the most part just took that formula and ran with it and improved it, and so on. But enough of that. Let's actually talk about what makes a good survival horror game and what makes a game scary. Now, of course, scariness is a very subjective factor. Now, on YouTube, there are loads, I'm not even going to try to quantify a number, let's just say a lot of videos of people playing Amnesia: The Dark Descent, and I know people who have played it, and they get absolutely petrified of the whole game. And I actually own Amnesia: The Dark Descent, and I've played quite a bit of it, and I must admit, I love the game. I think it's a fantastic achievement, especially for such a small indie studio. It's a handful of people. It's a ridiculously small amount of people to have produced a game that has graphics so impressive, so much atmosphere, the music is fantastic. But to me, the game is not that scary. I think the atmosphere in it is dripping. It's visually dripping from the walls, especially if you have a surround sound system, and you turn it up loud enough. It's very immersive. And the game can give you your jump here and there, but to me, the game isn't as scary as some people give it credit for. Now, of course, as I've said before, horror is subjective. Some people, would get absolutely terrified about paranormal activity. Others would, find something else scary. That's fine. But to me, Amnesia is not that scary, and I'll tell you why. I don't feel that there's any danger in it, in my opinion. Here's why. In Amnesia, you know roughly when monsters are going to show up, and that's when you've solved puzzles. Now, of course, when you solve a puzzle, the monster, a zombie or what have you, will show up, and you'll have to hide in a room or whatever. And as long as you do a reasonably good job of hiding, you won't die. There are exceptions, but I might get back to that later, depending on how this goes. I'm ad-libbing this. But perhaps there are a few exceptions, such as the water monster. Now, the water monster is, in my opinion, one of the best sections of the game. But, in my opinion, when you die once or twice in Amnesia, that is when the immersion is lost. That's when the scariness of the game begins to fade, and it instead just turns into a very atmospheric game, and a very good game, with a good storyline and all that, but that's when the scariness fades, when you actually die once or twice, because then you realise, hey, you know what, there's not actually much penalty in this. I can die and die and die, and it's not that bad. I mean, the system is fairly generous, so it's not as though if I die I have to worry about a checkpoint being, 20 minutes away. And because I don't have to worry about weapons and all that, I don't feel like I can really be in a bad situation. The worst situation you can possibly be in is, be low on oil and also have a low amount of tinderboxes and so on. Then you can be in a bad situation, but generally speaking, you're generally okay. But that isn't to say it's a bad game. I think it's got great atmosphere. I just don't think it's particularly horrifying. I feel the monsters are kind of used as almost set pieces in many ways, and I think the game is fantastic. And of course, there's also a lot of mods, and I can't talk about those. I believe one of them is called White Knight, and I haven't seen much of it. I've only just seen a little bit of it on YouTube, and it does look pretty good. But moving on, Silent Hill, on the other hand, I can actually say is a pretty frightening game. In my opinion, Silent Hill, on the other hand, especially 1, 2 and 3, Homecoming being the worst of the series in my opinion, and I'm assuming the opinion of many fans, Silent Hill definitely has the atmospheric box ticked, the scary box ticked, and various other boxes ticked, including storyline and all that good stuff. But the fact of the matter is, the game itself is very good. It does everything it sets out to do extremely well, and that is scare the pants off you. But it does so in a very good manner. First of all, the pacing of the story is just right. The pacing of the story is to the point where you don't feel you're learning everything at once, but you also don't feel that things are being kept from you just because it's a big twist, even though there is a big twist in the game and I won't spoil it, so don't worry about that. The game also has atmosphere up the wazoo, the ever-encompassing mist, fog, and general bleakness of the game, as well as the constant buzzing of the radio as you're getting closer to enemies and you can hear them skittering about. It's very kind of terrifying. But the reason, in my opinion, it's that much more scary than even Amnesia, and the reason I put it scary category, is because of the sense of loss. First of all, you feel a sense of loss when you shoot each bullet. When you shoot your handgun, you feel like, oh damn, did I really have to use that? And you second guess every use of health pack. You really do wonder, should I use that, or maybe I should just try and run past these monsters because I don't really want to, but at the same time, can I afford the health of getting hit? It's a constant survival battle. Second thing is, it uses a save system, and some people hate save systems, some people love checkpoints. In my opinion, checkpoints though are a cop-out. Now, notice how I said my opinion, but checkpoints do feel a slight cop-out. They feel like they are the system where if you die, there's no penalty, just as I've said in Amnesia. You've come back to the room, or just before the room that you just, fell over in, and then you can just continue on your merry way and, try ad nauseum. Whereas on the save point, sure, fair enough, you could argue if you just saved outside of a room or something, it's kind of the same thing, but it doesn't feel like that with every monster, because generally speaking, the checkpoints are, or should I say save points, are spaced smartly enough so if you do die, you're kind of apprehensive. And the next reason is, much like many of the really great games out there, the game puts you in control of a character that just feels like an everyday, ordinary character. He just goes to Silent Hill, seemingly searching for his wife. Now, of course, she's been dead for a couple of years, so that might raise a few eyebrows, but, he goes there anywho, and he's searching for his wife, and of course that's when the town takes him, shall I say. No, I won't spoil anything more than that, but if you have not played the game, I would encourage you to do so. So, in my opinion, the storyline, the atmosphere, everything just works together for this game to produce a truly terrifying experience. Now, I'm going to put in another game that might be a bit controversial to some, and that's Fear. Some people don't like Fear, but in my opinion, Fear 1 is very atmospheric. I would not classify it as super scary. It has a few moments, but I'm going to give it at least an honourable mention, because I feel the first game at least does a lot right. I feel that it gives a lot of nods towards the right buttons, shall I say. I don't think it nails it completely. I feel that you gain a bit too much power too fast, but I do feel that it's an impressive addition. Now, if I were to give an honourable mention as well, I'd have to give it to Resident Evil. In fact, Resident Evil was one of the first games that really kind of made panic. Resident Evil is definitely a panicky game. I wouldn't say it's scary. Resident Evil, and by Resident Evil I mean the early ones, such as 1, 2, 3 and Code Veronica, and also 0. Though Zero, for some reason, is probably the lesser known of the games, obviously because it appeared on the GameCube. Now, Resident Evil definitely has the panic and sometimes horror, but not so much if I'm honest. Resident Evil 1, you do feel a great connection for the characters. They feel a little bit overplayed, a little bit over-exaggerated. And of course, the original Resident Evil, particularly on the PlayStation version, not so much the remake, which was released for the GameCube, but the PlayStation/PC/Saturn version, was notoriously bad for the voice acting. But there was a sense from, reading all the notes, the research notes, and just kind of getting immersed in the atmosphere, that the game was actually a living, breathing world in many ways before you actually got there. The thought of actually these, research scientists creating this virus, and then there being a series of unfortunate events, shall we say, and managing to unleash it upon themselves was pretty bad. But the remake on the GameCube, once again, took it a step further. You really got an sense of the experimentation that went on there. And I believe the character's name is Lisa, but I haven't played the game in a long time, is a great example of this. The little girl. I won't spoil it any further, but if you've not played the remake, I recommend, if you own a Wii, to try and pick the game up, or if not, just, try and beg, borrow, or steal a way to play the game. It's very good if you're a Resident Evil fan. Definitely better than the first Resident Evil. The remake is definitely superior, in my opinion. It also gets rid of the cheesy voice acting, which is always a bonus. The creatures in the game are definitely horrifying. A great example, of course, would be the Tyrant, but I would also argue that the spider bosses, the giant snakes, and everything else are very memorable bosses, and for the most part you don't want to fight them. The snake, for example, is kind of frightening because you don't want to get poisoned, because you don't want to go through the hassle of, getting the cure and all that. And the spider boss is just irritating because of the poison factor. But Tyrant is probably the culmination of everything wrong that they've done in the place. The fact that they've basically done this to this poor guy, that he's in this test tube and he's basically turned into this killing machine. That was deliberate, much like some of the other creatures, but some of those were accidents. They were just, hey look, we've accidentally infected them because of the spill. But with the Tyrant, it along with Lisa, which is, I've mentioned her briefly before, but they are, synonymous with the fact of deliberate intent. That really made the game for me. I think it definitely made it atmospheric. I wouldn't say the game is nowhere near as scary as Silent Hill, but it is pretty impressive. Now, of course, all these opinions, and I'd love to get your feedback on this. What games have really scared you? I'd like to play them myself, to be honest with you. I've heard the Clock Tower series is very impressive, although I've never actually gotten around to playing it. And of course Fatal Frame and a few other games are pretty well known, as well as Penumbra, by the same developers, I believe, as created Amnesia, so at the very least I want to check that out. I missed it in the Steam sale over Christmas. But anyway, so if you guys can give me your thoughts, comments and feedback, that would be appreciated. Right, thanks and bye.